I love great conversations. Hi, my name is Angel Jones. Thank you for joining me on 12-minute convos where I help you create a brand of your own unique, real self. Listen in as I have conversations with amazing people from all over the world. Good morning, Tim Lewis. How are you going on this wonderful, beautiful morning?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's actually bright and sunny here. It's cold, but it's bright and sunny, so that's the main thing.
What part of the world are you in right now?
I'm in London in the United Kingdom.
Ouch. Cold is an understatement.
Well, I could be in Canada. So.
Ooh, ouchie. Yeah, ouchie. Well, my friend, I always offer my email that's in draft, which is Caribbean Sunshine, packaged really nicely, that I can always send your way at the press of a button.
Yeah, well, that works for me. Any sunshine that it feels sorry for us people in the northern part of the northern hemisphere. Any contributions that people want to make of sunshine, kindly send them over. We'll take it as a charity prize.
That's wonderful. Tim, hey, please do tell us which of your talents is responsible for us connecting at this time.
Well, I'm not entirely certain, but I would guess that as you connected to me via social media, it's something to do with my quite expansive efforts on social media. So I will go with that as the answer.
I think I'll tell you the podcast is the thing. One of the things I'm really stretching for is connecting with podcasters for this particular journey, this quest. You do have a podcast, don't you?
Yes, I do have a podcast, and that is the main thing that I have been promoting on social media. So, yes, my podcast is Begin Self-Publishing, and it's about self-publishing and, to a large extent, marketing. It really should probably be called Tim's Marketing and Publishing Show now, but it's still called the Begin Self-Publishing Show because that's how it started as.
So where did the inspiration come to create this podcast?
Well, I always wanted to start a podcast. I mean, like a lot of people, once you start listening to podcasts, you kind of think, especially indie podcasts, you think, like, I would quite like to run a podcast. And clearly I've been self-publishing for about 4 years now. I've written 6 books so far, 3 science fiction novellas that you can buy on Amazon and 3 fantasy books. And I suppose the inspiration in terms of doing a self-publishing podcast is that I was very keen to dispel some of the common myths about self-publishing and also to try and steer people away from some of the more unscrupulous providers that are out there of self-publishing services. So that was the initial inspiration for starting the podcast.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with a friend that developed something for Amazon, and I'm asking him, hey, who can you trust to do Amazon ads, right? And he is in the space, right? And he said, no one. I was like, ouch. All right. Yeah, so I'm glad that you've created something that can help others, because I'm guessing I'm not the only one. How has your experience been with the feedback from those that listen?
It's generally very good. I mean, like with all podcasters, you always want more listeners. But yeah, no, I mean, I've tried. I mean, in fact, episode 100, I made the change. It was a weekly show, and now I'm doing one every 2 weeks. And the reason for doing that was partly because all I was doing was the podcast, and also partly because I wanted to keep the quality up of the shows. Sometimes when you're doing like a very regular schedule, I know you're doing an extremely tight schedule. It's very easy sometimes to get behind and to think, I've got to rush a show out. Because I did manage to do every single one of those 100 weeks when I was the first 100 episodes.
Wow, congratulations.
But now I'm doing one.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now I'm doing one every 2 weeks, and that's helping me to batch up further ahead. So yeah, I've got at least 3 shows recorded now ahead. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that definitely helps tremendously. So again, why will you continue to repeat this skill of sharing your business via podcasting?
Well, I mean, as a pure business play, the podcast doesn't make much sense, but the thing that I've noticed, and the new book I'm writing about is actually about social media. So that's why I was a bit unsure as to where the connection came from, whether you'd heard about the book I was writing or whether it's the podcast. But the thing that has been so useful for me about having a podcast is the connections I made, both with the audience and with the guests. I've had some pretty high-profile marketing people on the show, and I've learned an awful lot myself. So even if nobody listened to the show, it has been just fantastically useful for me to have the podcast and to be able to talk to people and connect and make those connections with people. Yeah. And then with social and going to conferences, you can keep those connections going and enhance them. And I think that's the real power of the modern new online economy.
Yeah. And there are always two listeners in an interview type podcast. It's which is you and the individual that is being interviewed, and that's pretty amazing. It's in itself for those that are dear the learning opportunity. Then I believe spirals to so many others, whether it is via listening immediately or just what you learned and how you express that again and again and again and again. Like I had this guy on last night and he expressed something, Sean Jackson, and he said the podcast is something that gives trust, because after someone purchases and they go and they listen, it gives them that, hey, this is good. This is value still being delivered. I was like, wow, I never thought of that. You're very correct. Because it's similar to YouTube, right? It's just it works the other way. But you want to purchase something, you go, you look on YouTube, the content is there. It builds your trust, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think this is where people get podcasting wrong. Podcasting isn't necessarily a great medium to get thousands and thousands of followers. You're way more likely to get that on YouTube. But that element of trust that people who already know you, who maybe have read your blog or they've met you somewhere, they'll start listening to your podcast, and then that level of trust goes up exponentially. And that's where, just from a marketing point of view, our podcast is so useful. I mean, I wouldn't use a podcast to try and create a tribe, but on the other hand, it's such a great way to make a connection with a tribe that you already have. And those people then will start talking to other people, and it will grow naturally after a while. But podcasting is kind of like the way that you make that connection much deeper.
Tell us one other thing that you've done, Tim, consistently over the last 3 years.
One other thing that I've done consistently. The thing I've actually been doing much more consistently recently, not entirely over the last 3 years, but last year or so, is setting up procedures for doing things, certainly for the podcast. So every week every other week when I'm doing the podcast, I've got a little Trello card with a checklist of things that I need to do for promoting the show. And when I used to edit the shows myself, I used to go through and tick off the lists. And that's made such a difference in terms of getting that consistency and quality level correct. Because if you don't have lists, then you just forget things. Then you'll be like, oh, I forgot to do this. And I wish that I'd rolled that out further in my life. And I'm kind of in the process of doing that. Yeah, I mean, having a business, you are almost creating a structure. You're creating this kind of set of procedures, partly so that then eventually then you can hand that off to somebody else to do. But if you don't have that scaffold of kind of like, this is what I'm doing here, this is what I do with this, then it becomes much more hard to keep that quality level high. So that's the thing I've been consistently doing for about the last year or so.
How does that make you feel?
That makes me feel a lot better in terms of I'm not missing things, because I know I would be missing things otherwise. So, and it also makes me feel like I'm progressing. And the feeling of progressing is fantastic in business, because if you feel that you're just doing the same thing over and over and over again, even if you're making money, that can be soul destroying for a business person, certainly a solo business person.
Love it. Well, amazing audience. We are live with Tim Lewis. Again, you could check him out. So the website I'll point them to is stonehampress.com. Is that okay? No?
That, or they can go, if they're interested in the podcast, there's a separate podcast website with all the podcast and self-publishing resources, which is beginselfpublishing.com.
Okay.
So they can go to either. The Stone and Press is where I've got a few blog articles about social media and stuff in general, and I've got links to my actual fiction books. So if people want to buy my fiction books, that's the place to go. If they're interested in self-publishing, go to beginselfpublishing.com.
Wonderful. Well, my friend, let's switch gears now for a moment and let me invite you into my time machine that is surrounded with beautiful warm blue Caribbean water. Tim, what is your earliest childhood memory?
Well, the earliest childhood memory I have is being in a paddling pool in the garden in the hot summer of 1976 when I was 3 years old.
So what were you doing in that paddle boat?
Well, it's not a paddle boat; it was a paddling pool. So it was
Paddling
like
pool. Express more.
It's like,
Tell me more. What is that?
well, in the UK, a paddling pool is like one of these kind of it's almost like a portable kind of pool that it's like a plastic thing, I think, where you put it outside in the garden and it's like for kids to splash around in, basically. So it's just like a portable. We don't have much in the way of need for swimming pools in the UK most of the time.
Yeah.
No, none of the houses have swimming pools because you'll only use them about for. But they sort of wheel out this sort of paddling pool and fill it up. So that's kind of what a paddling pool is, I think.
Why do you think this memory is so clear?
I think it's because it was probably my first experience of being outside in actual some sort of, because it was a very hot summer in 1976. It was historically until like the 2000s, it was the hottest summer in like 30 years or something along those lines. And also I think it was the thing of being outside, and obviously the sensations of water and the rest of it makes a difference. So I think that's why I remember that.
Yeah. Well, can I offer an interpretation to the thought picture you created in my mind?
Yes, of course you can.
Oh, I love the way you do that with your sentences, the spaces. I love the idea that of what can be created anywhere, and just the spaces. So even in your self-publishing model of what you're producing and what you're helping others attain, it's like setting up a pool in the middle of somewhere where someone said it's impossible, isn't it? Like there's the publishing world and there's all that goes with that and the challenges to even get the thing you created out there. But to just see the gentle, hey, you can do this way as well, right? There is a way to have a pool without doing all of that. It's just intriguing how your mind connects those things to what you're doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are the product of all of our history, and at times we think we aren't, but there are always threads that go through our past, aren't there?
Yes, my friend, there are. If we fast forward, Tim, to when you were 12 years old, what was your favorite song?
Well, I had to look this one up because I must admit to those listeners who don't know, maybe we get some pre-advance warning of the questions. I couldn't remember, but then I had a look at the songs of 1985 when I was 12 years old. This is a long time ago. This is when being an older entrepreneur. But the one that struck me was We Built This City by Starship, because I do remember liking that song a lot. So whether it was my favourite song, I don't know, but it certainly was a favourite, and it's just a fantastically uplifting and positive song. So that's why I like that particular music.
Love it. Well, the thread is definitely there. One podcaster to one. We built this city. We built this city. Love it, love it. Well, Tim, we've arrived at our destination, but before we get off of this time machine, there's a small declaration form. Says yes or no, possibly a bit more. We're going to move pretty quickly here. Are you ready, Tim?
I am ready, yes.
Tim, have you chosen someone to pass on your skills to?
Not yet.
Are you married?
No.
Do you have children?
No.
Do you believe in God?
Yes.
Do you have an inner circle of friends?
Yes.
Do you watch TV for more than 3 hours a day?
No.
Or about 3 hours a week?
Yes.
What about screen time, the phone and the computer? Is it more than 8 or less than 8 hours a day?
Marginally more.
Tim, if you had to share with us a statement that represents who Tim Lewis is, your own unique real statement, what would you say that is?
If I was going to have a statement, I would say that I've learnt through my life experience that you only live once and you have to make the most of things. While action doesn't necessarily guarantee results, inaction does guarantee no results.
Yeah,
so that would be my statement.
Love that. Ooh, Tim Lewis, this has been a great pleasure, my friend. Before you leave, is there anything else you'd like to share with our amazing audience?
Well, as I said before, my current new book that I'm writing is about social media. So I'm looking at the moment, and I am interviewing people about their experiences using their social media to get ahead. So that will be a book that is going to be coming in the new year. So anybody who's interested in that, even possibly as a case study, should keep an eye on the stoneandpress.com website, and that book should be available in the new year at some point, probably around March, April time, I would guess.
Have you got I'm guessing you haven't named it as yet.
No, though I'm thinking of something along the lines of the real social advantage or something along those lines. But yeah, it's still a work in progress, like all things.
Understood. Well, Tim, hey, again, this has been a great pleasure, my friend. Thank you for being on What is Inspired by 12-Minute Convos with Angel Jones.
It's been my pleasure, Engel.
Thank you for being on 12-Minute Convos with Angel Jones. Stay tuned for more from our advertisers.
Diabetes is a mountain pandemic. It's a disease that's not acute but chronic. Similar to this rhyming method, I have simplified the definition, the signs and symptoms, and the complications of diabetes for both adults and children in my books, Poems for Patients, A Focus on Diabetes, and The ABCs of Diabetes for Children. These books are available on Amazon.com, and for more information, you can visit my website, poemsbyaj.com. That's poemsbyaj.com.